You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by machinists. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am happy to welcome Riley Gillman. Welcome, Riley.
How's it going?
It's going great. So, for
Good.
anybody who doesn't know who you are and what you do, what are all the details?
Well, that's a bit of an interesting one. So, I'm Riley Gillman, and I am the technical operations manager for Nikola Motor Company. And you kind of can't find me anywhere because I don't like to be found sometimes. Uh,
Fair
I
enough.
am on Instagram, so you can find me at Riley Gillman, and then my LinkedIn and my Facebook and stuff like that. So,
Perfect.
if you want to be my friend, don't be afraid. I'll still accept your request. I just don't accept requests from all the strange people out there.
There you go. Well, let's get into what does a technical operations manager do then?
The Tom. So I'm in charge of all the R&D and all of the different styles of manufacturing, whether it's subtractive or additive, for developing the fuel cell semi trucks and the battery electric semi trucks. So if an engineer has an idea or if we have a problem to solve, we will jump into high gear and we'll do that.
That's awesome. That sounds like a ton of fun.
It really is. It is a blast and a challenge every day. Um, the workload is very interesting. It's very up and down as projects, advance or like regress or they move on to the next stage of, whether it's pre-production or, alphas or betas or into gammas. And then you've got, production. And so once production actually starts, that's kind of out of our wheelhouse. We don't really deal with the production side of things, only in emergency, short-term, interim things. So, we'll get a request, what we call from a customer, but obviously they're all internal people. But we'll get a request and then we'll manufacture, 5 to 1,000 components and then, send it out the door. And it gives them, the purchasing department, enough time to find the supplier, qualify their process, and make sure that they can meet the deliverable schedule and things like that.
How cool. So you mentioned you have additive and subtractive.
Yes.
What kind of machinery are we talking about? What do you have at your disposal?
Kind of the whole gambit, and it's really fun because a lot of the equipment that we do have is things that you wouldn't normally see in an R&D shop. R&D shops are smaller machines that, maybe, start with an H or, just other like equipment. And we have everything but that. So everything is 5-axis. So we're very heavy into the 5-axis world. So we've got, starting off with the smallest to biggest, this is fun. All right. So I've got a DMG Mori DMU 85. So that's an 850 millimeter platter 5-axis machine.
And that's your smallest?
That's the smallest.
Okay.
Yep, it's very big. And then we go up to the medium machine, which is a DMG Mori 125 FD. So that's a very large machine.
Oh, yeah.
Which has a really cool kinematic on it. It's trying to wrap your head around programming is insane. And then moving up to the big boy, we've got a Zimmerman FZ37, which is a 6.5 meter machine.
Right. It's a room.
Yeah, it's a room. I mean, we just put a roof on it, and the cost of the roof is the cost of a very well built out VF4.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you're like, this is insane. So it's very big. I mean, you open up the doors, and how we built the machine into the building, it's flush with the ground. So there's no you don't have to step up or anything. You just can drive a forklift into the machine. So 22 feet by 12 feet by 8.5 feet. So it's huge. It's got 2 chip augers along the sides. So when we're cleaning chips off, we use a shovel.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And I assume that's HSK 100 then?
No, it's actually HSK 63.
No way.
Yeah, it's a 25,000 RPM spindle.
Okay, that makes a little more sense, but I'm still surprised with something that big.
It is. Zimmerman makes it in multiple different configurations with what their milling head. They've got 7 milling heads, I believe, and they range from very delicate high RPM, 30,000 RPM spindles to their heavy duty 7-axis head that, is an HSK 100, and they're doing mass material removal. So that's pretty cool. We don't have that. We just have this HSK 63.
I bet it's still a monster though.
It is, but it's delicate. It's, people walk up to it, and especially machining people, and they go, oh, man, you could get aggressive with some stuff. And you're like, yeah, but the problem is you got to think about it. The Z column is dangling from the sidewalls of 8.5 feet. And so you have this giant pivot point, then it likes to pick up harmonics. And so you could have a whole bunch of harmonics, and you're like, well, I'm not taking that big of a cut. I'm pushing so we operate mostly in millimeters. So you're like, oh, I'm pushing a 50 millimeter, face mill, and it's creating a vibration that you can hear in the machine, and you can also see it on the vibration meter on the control. So it's a very unique machine.
So with an 8-foot Z,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of risers are you using? I mean, you think of like a normal 5-axis and you're like, well, I need to get up closer to the spindle to get it more rigid.
Yeah.
I've got an 8-inch riser, a
Yeah.
6-inch riser, but you've got 8 feet. So what does this look like?
So currently, right now, we're working on the ground.
Oh boy.
So I've got a FCS system, like base gauge, and we're doing some big work right now, and it's just on the ground because we didn't have time because the parts one are really big, and so they don't fit on our current. We also have a FCS, like they call it the base gauge, and it's like a giant horizontal tombstone. I mean, it's 1,500 millimeter by, it's like either 1,500 or 2,000 millimeter by 500 millimeter, and it's laying on its side. But you can also stand it vertically and use the two opposite sides for mounting fixtures that way. So you can almost use it as horizontal.
That's insane. You have a 40-20 machine as a fixture piece. Like
exactly. And it's bizarre because like the parts we're currently working on right now, they're very big, but they're not heavy. And so you could mount them on a horizontal surface, but we're doing 3 and 4 parts at a time. And so the same setup, but it's just a lot of parts. And so you just hit go and you just let it run for a while. And you don't really have to worry about it. And it's not like you're going to stop because you got to worry about chips, because it's got so much volume that you can just throw chips wherever you want. So, yeah.
That's crazy. So you also mentioned additive. So what do you
Yes.
have at your disposal there?
So, well, to finish off our removal, we've got a Haas ST25Y that is their, it's a lathe. I mean, it does
Makes
what
round
we
stuff.
need it to do. It does have live tooling and all the things like that, and we've gotten pretty frisky with some material removal on that, and it was fun. It gave us something to do. But we make like almost aerospace style of connectors now, where like in a true aerospace shop, you would have these really nice like aluminum, fit aerospace connectors, and you're gonna put on all your custom pins and stuff like that. We do some not work like that, but kind of, smaller dainty things. But then also like when they go to, the purchasing team comes in and says, hey, we need you to make some parts. We're like, oh, okay, what do you need? I need a bushing. Cool. All right, well, let's just make 1,000 bushings and it'll be done in a couple hours. That's fine. So we do some fun stuff, but then we also do like really boring things on that. And then we also we have a 5-axis CMM. So we've got a hexagon, I think it's a 9-12-8
Okay.
5-axis hexagon CMM.
Like a global.
Yeah, it's
S
a
or something?
global S. It's either a chrome or a blue.
Okay.
I don't remember. I think it's blue. So yeah, that's a really great piece of equipment to have as well, that we've put very big parts on. When they come to you and say, hey, we need you to inspect this part, you're like, huh, it's a good thing I have a 20-ton crane overhead, because I can't put that part on with a forklift.
Right.
So, there's really, it's interesting. And then, so that kind of rounds on our subtractive manufacturing, but then our additive is we've kind of got a range of 3D printers. So we've got large all the way to very small and very accurate. So we have a Big Rep Pro, which is a 1 meter volume 3D printer, with a 1 millimeter nozzle. So it extrudes a lot of material pretty quickly.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, but it's not as, the surface resolution is not what people expect it to be, because they are so used to having an ender or whatever with a 0.4 nozzle and producing very high resolution prints. Like, oh, well, we want that. Well, that would take you 2 months to print something. So we're going to print it with 1 mil nozzle and print it much, much faster, but it's not going to have the surface finish that you want. So it's interesting. People like it and they kind of shy away from it sometimes.
I could see it being useful for like a seat prototype though, or
Yeah.
something like that.
So we've done like the whole front end of our truck. I 3D printed the entire front end one time, and it was a massive project. It ran. So we bought the machine during COVID, got it on the floor. No one was allowed to travel or anything like that. It was like in the heat of it, right? And so they were like, yeah, we're not coming out to set it up, but you have an iPhone. Let's do this. And I'm like, are you serious? You want me to set this up over FaceTime? And they're like, yep, let's do it.
Wow.
And so I was on the phone with the guys forever. And it was, it was fine. Like I've set up machines before, I've moved equipment, all the equipment in the shop. I was the guy in charge of moving everything in. So I worked with the riggers and we're loading, 80,000-pound machines and we're putting them on 1/2-inch locators, right? So I wasn't like shied away from like, oh, okay, whatever. It's a 3D printer. There's not much to do. But we put it on the floor and had to go through and take all the rigging straps off and level the machine, the build plate, get the gantry set up the way it needed to be, and then do software updates and this and that. And so that was an interesting one. All over FaceTime.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I'm glad it went well, but
It
yeah,
did.
that could have been disastrous.
So we got that machine installed. The day that it installed, I was like, well, I have a project. They're like, well, let's print like a vase or let's print, this goofy thing. And I'm like, how about no? We're just going to go straight into printing parts that I need because I need them. That's why we bought this machine. They're like, well, how long is it going to run for? And it was almost a volume print. It was like 17 days. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. So, yeah, it's like, I want to say it was 2 or 3 8,000-kilogram spools. Yeah.
That's insane.
But
What kind of material are you printing with that?
So Big Rep uses, obviously, all these guys use all their own, branded material. So this was I think I printed it in, they call Pro HT, which is like a modified PLA with a fiber element to it. So that's kind of the synopsis of that material.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're just stressed the whole time. Like, is
Oh,
it going
yeah.
to come off the build plate? Is it going to warp? Is it?
Oh,
Oof.
yeah. Well, and I'm not, I'm used to very, very large prints. So we used to own when the company first started, and they bought a BAM, a Cincinnati BAM. You ever heard one of those?
No, I have not.
Big area additive machine. It was 12 feet by, no, this one was bigger. It was 24 feet by 8 feet by 6 feet of 3D print volume. Yeah. So
That's insane.
it was a big, big machine, but it has a very unique purpose. And so we had that machine under kind of the dismay of me. I was like, no, don't buy it. Don't buy it. Bad idea. I've had a lot of experience with it. Don't buy it. Sure enough, I show up and it's there. So that was kind of, whatever.
I just looked it up. It is like a paint booth. Like it's
huge.
Massive. Holy cow.
Are you looking at the BAM or oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's huge.
That's insane. It's like a 30 to 40,000 pound 3D printer.
Uh-huh.
That's mind blowing.
And they make them bigger. Yeah, they make them much bigger. In fact, when I was doing some contract work for Oak Ridge National Lab, they had one, and it was big enough that you walk underneath it. It was on like 6-foot stilts.
That's the one I'm looking at right now. Yeah,
huge.
Well, and it uses pellets too, which is bizarre.
Yes. And it extrudes I forget it was a Sabic material. I forget the brand or like the actual product name, but it was carbon fiber ABS. So our like token thing was it's 80% Lego and 20% carbon fiber. So it was this 80-20 blend, and you would have to load it would vacuum operated very similar to a injection mold machine. So it'd vacuum the pellets into a hopper. The hopper would then dry the pellets, and then as the machine called for it, it would vacuum them over to the head, and then it would extrude it. So extrusion rates were anywhere from like 50 to 400 pounds an hour.
Whoa.
Yeah. It was a lot.
That is fast.
Yeah. So we sold that machine because we don't have a use for it at Nikola. So that was good. So, but then we've got like a Stratasys Objet 500. So that does like really high resolution resin prints, which is pretty cool. It does the color spectrum, which is very unique. So it does four different model materials on a support material, and depending on, you get these like little like triangle like color codes, and you have your primary colors in the corners, and then if it's in that color spectrum of all these different little hues, that's the color you can print. So you'd actually go to the printer and you say, "Oh, I want this surface in this color code," and then you could print that way. It was really cool. So we've got that machine, and then we've got a slew of, I've got a Ender S51 or S1 Pro, and then we've got resin printers, which I'm like super into right now. Those are really cool. So the Frozen Transforms and the Eleglu Saturns and Mars, and I'm looking at buying one for the house, and it's like, oh, this is cool, but then it smells a ton, and I don't really want to deal
Yeah.
with that, and
That's always the pain is the cleanup, like cleaning
yeah,
the prints and
yeah.
drying them. And yeah, for sure.
So
Even with like Forum Labs's wash and cure stations,
yeah,
it's still kind of a pain.
yeah.
So yeah, it is what it is, unfortunately. But you get such high definition prints off of them that it's so
Yes.
cool.
Well, and we've gotten into using there's a product by Frozen. It's called it's like 410 Pro or Onyx 410, and it's awesome. It's an engineering grade material, and I've printed a few parts that are in production out of that material.
That's so
It's
cool.
super cool. They come out awesome. Like sometimes you've got issues with like layer delamination, or it's like, oh, it kind of like cured something to the screen and now it's printing all wonky or whatever. But knock on wood, has not failed to print yet, and the prints are strong. So it's
That's
pretty cool
so
stuff.
cool.
Yeah,
Is that the stuff that, can't remember if it was Frozen, but one of them had a co-developed polymer with like DuPont or
Loctite.
something, or Loctite. Yeah, that's
Yep.
what it was.
So that's
Okay.
what this is. So
Yeah, I've never bought any, but I've looked at it. I'm like, I can't justify it quite yet, but I really want some.
yeah, and it's pricey. It's like $56 a bottle, but it's
Yeah.
totally worth it. It makes awesome parts.
Okay. We
So
might have to pick some up then.
yeah.
That's
But I
cool.
mean, you're also like, oh, this is a $56 bottle of goo. Like, do I really want to print that action figure out of this stuff? Or, you know,
I was just talking to someone last night about this because he was asking for my bamboo if I had bought any like nylon stuff.
mhm.
And it's like I have a roll of it, but it's just sitting there going to waste because I bought it because I'm like, oh, this is so cool. And then it's like, well, I don't want to waste this, $50
Yeah,
spool on some knickknack. Like I want it to be something cool that's worth it,
exactly.
and then it just never gets used.
Yeah. And then it sits there and then it ages out and you're like, well, okay, I just wasted money anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Next time I'll just print whatever comes up, and
There you go.
yeah. Well, that's amazing. So is that the course of your machinery, or you got anything else that's neat?
Yeah, that's kind of the course of the machinery. Um, yeah. And then, we'll see. We're working on some other stuff that we might end up with a couple more Haas VF6s and a Datron M8 Cube. So we'll
Ooh,
see.
cool.
Don't know if that will happen, but it'll be great if it did.
Let's step it back then. How did you become the Tom? What is your experience?
The Tom.
Well, I like it.
It
That's a good one.
works.
Yeah. But how did you get to the point where you are now?
Oh man, it's interesting. I've had a very interesting younger life, and it kind of starts back when I don't know, I was a kid. And it's funny is I listen to these podcasts all the time, right? And everyone like, oh yeah, I was the guy that like took apart the remote and then like put it back together when I was like 6 years old or whatever, like or this or that. I was totally that guy, always taking stuff apart, always figuring out how it works. So it started way, way obviously back then. But then I used to race BMX. Then I rode a dirt bike for the first time. That was it. That was life changing. That was like my pivotal point, right? So I started riding motorcycles and I was like, I want to go pro. And so I started really racing hard. And then through a series of, minor injuries like breaking a femur and stuff like that, it kind of,
Minor.
yeah, right. It kind of like changed my course a little bit. And that was about high school. It was actually my senior year of high school. I broke my femur and I didn't go back to school for a while. And thank goodness I had done enough work ahead of time because I was planning on graduating early. I hated school, absolutely despised it. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to be in a wheelchair for a year, I was like, I'm going to figure out what to do. And my dad, is the smartest guy that I know because he is a brilliant entrepreneur. So I won't get into his businesses, but he instilled in me at a very young age was you don't have to work for someone your whole life. You can do what you want to do. And so when I got injured and I was like, well, there goes pro motocross, I'm out of that. I didn't really think that I was going to recover fully because I mean it was a year. It was I was non weight bearing for 6 months and then it took me a year to figure out how to walk straight again.
Oh, that's
Yeah. So I'm like,
rough.
well, if I'm going to be in a wheelchair or sitting around doing therapy 3 times a, day, because, the therapist was next door and we knew him and he was really great. It was actually Lance Armstrong's personal trainer.
No way.
Yeah. It was cool. Like I've met some amazing people and super athletes in my younger years.
Wow, how
Like
cool.
people that you're like, oh, this is Lance. You're like Lance? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Lance. Like, oh, hey buddy, and like I got roped into doing circuit training with Scott Speed and Colin, what's his name? Scott Speed, he had a small stint in Formula One,
Right,
right? And
yeah.
now he's racing, rally cars and like doing amazing. And so it was really fun because where we were at living and I got exposed to a lot of really fun, cool stuff.
That's awesome.
But anyways, that I digress a little bit. But so anyways, my dad was like, "Hey, why don't you start a business? Like you love motorcycles, you love going to the parts house and hanging out with the guys there. Let's start a race, parts company." Well, parts company turned into, "Hey, I'm going to work on your bike." And then guys would come in and be like, "Oh man, I need to figure out how to get some more power out of this thing." This guy, he like totally beat me off the line. Like, I can help you with that. So, I was helping guys do little light motor building, changing pistons and, doing valve work and exhaust and minor things. But I always was working with, like, oh man, let me pull out my Dremel. I'm going to do a little port and polish on this, just on the side, right? And I was doing stuff like that on my own personal stuff. And then things changed for sure. And we were like, we're going to start a professional supercross motocross race team. We're going to race the AMA motocross and supercross series. So it's like, all right, let's do this. I need to figure out how to build a really good motor. And so I met this guy. So there's a company called Crankworks, and we had gone through and we'd gotten some sponsors and we got some riders and we started doing this professional racing career. And I was the chief mechanic working on all the bikes and whatnot. I'm 22, I think,
Oh,
right?
man. Talk about living
Rolling,
the dream for, like, a
right? I know,
22-year-old.
living that dream. We'd roll up to the track in a semi. It was a NASCAR. It was Jeff Gordon's old Cup, his NASCAR truck trailer.
No
Yeah. So my dad
way.
was like, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. I'm like, all right, cool. What does that mean? He goes, we're buying a hauler. Okay, we're buying a hauler. We're doing this. So, I mean, we show up 2008 AMA Supercross with a full fledged wrapped semi. I did all the graphics for it and wrapped it myself. Uh, yeah, we did everything ourselves. We tried to. And so that's kind of where this machining started out. I linked up with Crankworks and then we were getting custom crankshafts made, rods, pistons. They would balance the whole assembly. And then uh, Phil, the owner, he goes, "Hey, you really got to go talk to my buddy. His name's Short Block Charlie." It's like, who is Short Block Charlie? He goes, "Just go to this address, knock on the door 3 times." It was this really weird, like shady thing. And
Yeah.
sure enough, this guy comes out. He looks like ZZ Top. He's got white hair, this big old long, huge beard. And he goes, "You must be Riley." I'm like, "Yeah, what's up, Charlie? How you doing?" And he goes, "Come on in." And you go into this machine shop, and it was amazing. He does he mainly focuses on Harley Davidson, but that's not his love. His love is making horsepower. He doesn't care what it is. He's going to make horsepower. And so we sat down and we're like, okay, listen, we need to develop a motor package that's going to be able to win an AMA Supercross championship. Like we didn't have like the goal of like, oh, we're just going to show up and if we make the main event, cool. No, we were there to win. We had sponsors to answer to. We were fighting for a Honda contract, so we knew that from the get go. And so I was meeting with Charlie, And he goes, yeah, come on in. Let's check this out. He goes, I just got this new machine. It's a full, and I don't even know what it was or what it is now. I could probably call him and talk to him about it. But yeah, he like is the like, I don't know, let's just call it the brainchild of this French company that manufactures CNC valve seat and guide cutting machines. And it's
Oh,
crazy
cool.
because like you stick the guide rod into your valve guide, you stick that in there, and then you put your program in. And it's usually, you're going to cut like a 7 angle seat, or, big motors, you're going to cut a 3 angle seat or whatever. You put your profile in there, and it goes in and it bores. And every time it comes out, it stops, adjusts the cutting head, comes back in, and makes another cut. Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
he just got
super
started on
cool.
Instagram. So definitely go follow Short Block Charlie, because he does amazing stuff. And he's like, I don't know, about as old as Moses, probably. I mean, he was old when I met him, right? And this was forever ago. So funny story is like one day I show up, I'm like, hey, where's Charlie? And he goes, what do you mean, where's Charlie? I'm standing in front of you. I go, what do you mean you stay? And I looked at him, he didn't have his beard. He got a chunk of it burned off in a machine. And so he's like, screw it, I'll cut it all off. So I was like, oh, Charlie doesn't have a beard. That's weird. But yeah, so Charlie and I sat down and we developed this entire motor package: porting, polishing, custom beryllium or copper beryllium seats and guides. And here I am building motors and putting crankworks, crankshafts and rods and Crowder cams and JE pistons and all. I was putting this package together. We show up to Glen Helen Raceway to do testing for the motocross series, and Jeremy Albright is standing right next to me. Now, for anyone that's listening that doesn't know who Jeremy is, Jeremy was James Stewart's mechanic. James Stewart is probably one of the greatest riders ever, more natural talent than you could possibly imagine. And one of my riders, Scott Champion, goes flying past up the mountain just on the throttle. And he kind of like looks at me and he looks back at his clipboard. He's got his stopwatches on there and he clicks one. And I'm like, oh, what are you doing over there, buddy? He goes, who are you and what on earth was that? I go, I'm Riley and that's my motor. He goes, you ever need a job, you call me. I'm like, what? Jeremy Albrecht wants to hire me?
No
Yeah.
way.
And so Jeremy was like, hey, you just call me. That was the hottest motor I've heard in a long time. And so obviously I got my gig going on and I'm making these motors and we're doing pretty good. 2008 season ended, 2009 season, and I had the full works. We were doing isotropic surface finishing on transmissions. We were doing blueprinting of the whole bottom. And I mean, it was the hottest thing since sliced bread. This was a factory motor without getting it from a factory.
Wow,
And I
how
was building the
cool.
whole thing. And it was a really nice package. They were dynoing at like 43 horsepower for a 250, which was a lot.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was a lot. And we were taking carburetors in 2008, 2009. The Honda CRF 250 had what we know as the bog. It plagued the motorcycle industry, was the bog. So everyone tried to figure out how to get rid of the bog. Well, we were talking to these guys and talking to those guys and kind of sharing some secrets and back and forth. And I mean, we were taking carburetors. And before I even knew what machining was, except through Charlie, I'm over on a Bridgeport boring out carburetor bodies because we were taking like '06 carburetors from, this bike and then that bike and like Frankensteining these things together. And I'm over there punching out the bores on them to, open up the bore a half a millimeter, and it was, we developed a package that was bog free. So
Wow.
we go in 2009 season and we did really, really well. And then 2010, we got a lot of people that were like, hey, these guys are a force to reckon with. Like the results were not great. I mean, 12th to 15th place consistently every time, which I mean, we're talking about the motorcycle industry and professional guys that want to go racing. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that go ride every weekend, right? We're in the top 12 people.
Oh
So
yeah.
we were doing pretty good. And it got a lot of recognition from, the guys over at Honda and KTM. And so they were like, okay, like we think that you're ready for the next step. We're gonna sponsor you guys with a healthy investment, and we want you to be Team Riley Racing, backed by factory whoever. So it was a pretty cool deal.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
especially to like kind of just pick this up out of no. I mean, you rode, but like
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who ride, like you said, that don't start pretty successful, teams.
Yeah, and it was a lot of luck, a lot of dumb luck, and a lot of we did a lot of sacrifices, and I lived in a semi 50 weeks out of the year, so it's by the age 23, I think every state been to, like, because I literally we were
Wow.
driving, race to race to race. And so it's like, okay, well, there's all 50 or 49 states or 48 states or whatever. But you're like, all right, cool. This is great. Kind of been everywhere already. And it was weird, man. Like I'd wake up in hotels and like, where am I? Like, and it was like almost like a movie. Like you'd pick up the phone and call the front desk. I'm like, where am I? And they're like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And they're like, you're in Millville, Minnesota. I'm like, oh, Millville. All right, motocross racing to do. So it was fun. But so then, obviously the economy and all the things like that. And we got a notice from Yamaha that they shut down their whole factory team. And that was like a huge blow to the industry. And we had a lot of really, really big sponsors, you know, sponsors that were putting in millions of dollars. And they were like, yeah, we can't do this anymore because we don't know what pro motorcycle racing is going to look like in the future. Like, we're just shutting it down. And so we lost almost all of our sponsors.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a huge blow. But I mean, so the year prior, 2009, we kind of gauged it off of how many teams or how many semis there were. There was like 60 or 70 semis in 2008, 2009, leading up to 2010. And 2010 season, 23.
Oh
Yeah, it,
wow.
it shrunk majorly. I mean, factory Yamaha they didn't show. Like, they gave bikes to other people and said, hey, here's motors and here's suspension, here's bikes, but we don't have a team.
Right.
So that was huge. Yeah, it was. So we at that point we decided it's time to close this down. So we just closed the doors, sold everything we had, and I was like, okay, I'm unemployed.
Right. Yeah.
Sweet.
What's next?
Yeah, and so I was like, well, I'm going to go be a businessman. I think that's a wise thing to do. It's a little more safe than, racing motocross and breaking bones and all that stuff. And so I went to ASU to the WP Carey School of Business, and I'm just sitting there going, this sucks. Like, I hate this. This sucks. And so, going from all the freedom in the world and traveling and, it was amazing, living this rock star life. And then you're like, well, I have to go sleep in the same bed every day. And why am I learning about macroeconomics with 1,000 other people? Like, this really sucks. And so I literally one day was like, I'm done. And I got up, took my textbook, dropped it on the ground, walked out. That was it. Never went back. Yeah. So my dad, he was like, okay, well, I knew this day was going to happen. He goes, respectfully, he goes, you're not a dumb person, but you're not a school person. Yeah, you're very right on that.
You gave it a try though.
Yeah,
I
I mean, I
mean,
gave it a valiant effort.
yeah.
So dropped out of school. Then I was like, all right, what now? And so excuse me, I remember sitting at the dinner table with my parents, and they were like, okay, so you're not going to school anymore. What are you going to do? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm really kind of tired of the motorcycle thing. I was like, I need to figure out something to do. And so my dad, he was like, hey, you've toured every single excuse me, every single Harley Davidson manufacturing facility. He goes, and I saw your eyes light up when you saw that. And I mean, it's crazy to see these factories because, I mean, they've got heat treat rooms. They're taking in forklifts, like, by the hundreds of thousands of parts into heat treat. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Like, automated robotics and machines running themselves. And I was like, this is amazing. Didn't fully like grasp that machining was probably a right thing to do. And so he goes, why don't we go look at some machining schools? Well, Phoenix, Arizona, machining schools, they don't really exist. They, gateway community is a thing. But I was like really terrified. I was like, oh, I don't want to go back to school. So I we found this school, and it was called the Maricopa Skills Center. I didn't realize, so we got signed up. It was great. They have this really awesome machine shop. They had like a fleet of beautiful old, like sharp vertical mills and Cadillac manual lathes and like really nice old equipment.
That's
And they
cool.
had a Haas and like two mills and two lathes or one lathe. And the program was based upon you know nothing. We're going to bring in, we're going to teach you a trade, we're going to kick you out the door. End of story. All right, cool. I can do that. And so I walk in there, and the first time I smelled that gross, old, dingy machine shop smell, I was it. I was hooked. I'm like, I love it, man. Let's do this. So I dived deep. I deep dived into it hardcore, and they were like, "Yeah, this program it's going to last like 9 to 10 months." And I'm like, "All right, cool." I was out of there in 6 because I dove into it hard, and it was cool because they taught you everything the old way, right? Here's a piece of high speed steel. Let's show you how to make a cutting tool. Okay, cool. So you're over on a grinder and and that was like day one, man. Like we're like grinding cutting tools. And all right, this is a manual lathe. Let's figure out how to cut a part. And I mean, we're holding parts that were like, at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, plus or minus 5 thou. You know, I was like, this is impossible. You'd scrap a part 100 times before you made it one time right.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, on a machine that was way older than I was with a piece of high speed steel, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So it
That
was interesting.
that was exactly how Pima down here is.
Okay.
Like the first thing you did, grind your tools and you
Oh,
learn,
that's
how to
awesome.
put your chip breaker in and all that. And like
Yeah.
Brad and I still use the high speed tools that we ground then. Like
I
that's
love it.
yeah, like we have insert tools for our lathe, but like hey, sometimes you just gotta throw that thing in there
Oh
and you
yeah.
know it's gonna work. And yeah, it's great. It was like that, and then it's like, all right, now you get to learn how to grind a drill. Okay, now grind
Yep.
like 10 of them
Yeah.
because you're gonna learn.
Uh-huh. It was cool. So I mean, that's how I learned, and it was funny because one day I'm sitting there at lunch eating my food, and it was in a sketchy place, right? It was there was guards and metal detectors at the doors. And I
Ooh.
was like, there's something weird about this place. I don't get it. Well, I then found out I'm sitting at lunch with these other group of people, and this one guy, he's like, he always wore a white, like button up, like really nice dress shirt. I was like, this guy's kind of interesting. Super clean cut. I was like, dude, you're gonna ruin your shirts, man. Like, look at all of us. We got like holes and oil all over. He goes, no, man, I'm good. I'll just be careful. And I'm like, all right, what's your story? And he goes, oh, don't worry about it. Well, a couple months later, yeah, he got his shirt dirty one day and he went to change his shirt. Dude's covered in tattoos, head to toe. Like it was at his like all of his neckline and everything. I'm like, oh, those are interesting. Those are very colorful. Like, where'd you get all those? Prison. And they're like, oh man, what block were you on? And I'm like, I wasn't on a block, dude. Like,
Oh.
I'm a boy from like North Scottsdale. Like, what do you mean, what block? I'm 85260. That's what block I'm on. And they're like, oh, you went on this cell block at this. And I'm like, holy crap, I didn't realize it was I don't know what you call it. Like a way to like bring inmates back into society.
Right, yeah, like rehabilitation or
Yeah.
something.
And I'm like, I
Yeah.
had no idea. And they're like, oh, well, we don't market it that way. I'm like, who's your major client? Oh, the prison system.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, great. I'm gonna, make sure my truck's locked.
Right,
But
yeah.
it was really
Wow.
interesting. Made some really great friends. But yeah, it was very. You learn the basics, and it was hand coding G code, doing all your cutting tools, and it was really the foundation to what I know today. And it was going up to a machine and just looking at the control and being able to read G code is huge. You
Oh,
know,
I completely agree. I mean, I have said that so many times on this podcast. I know
hmm
there's so many people that say, "Oh, skip it and go straight to CAM programming," but
nope.
I really think that knowing that stuff is so important. I mean, there's so many times where I'll real quickly just scan the page before it cuts, and it's like,
Oh
"Oh,
yeah,
I see something I don't like. Okay, cool. I'm gonna
yeah.
go change that."
Oh yeah, and it's absolutely the most important thing in my personal opinion because we've got guys that come into the shop like, oh, I've been a machinist for this long, blah blah blah, and I'm like, all right, cool, let's just change a couple of codes down, let's make it run a little faster. And they're like, can't do that. Well, why not? Well, because I don't know how to read code. Okay, well here's a textbook, start reading. Like we're doing programs the old school way. So Yeah, learning that basics is huge. So I guess I got out of that and I was like, all right, I'm going to go get a machining job. Now I know what machining is. And I applied for the first thing that I saw, and it was a wire EDM shop. I was like, all right, sounds interesting. Really cool place. Floors are clean. They have these machines. I don't even really know what they do. And they sat me down, like, all right, cool, you're hired. No, like, interview. They're like, you show up here every day, you're hired. All right, cool. What do I do? You're going to watch this thing run. All right, well, what's the cycle time? Like, what are we looking to optimize things? And, how are we doing this? And they're like, no, it runs for 14 days. You're going to sit in that chair. You're not going to move. You're not leaving the building, but you're going to sit there and you're going to watch these machines. There's three of us on shift 24/7, 365. They never stopped. And they were
Wow.
making these extremely expensive, very, very detailed parts that were for the use in machines for making LED lights. And they were
Oh,
like,
interesting.
yeah, they were like a quarter million a piece. Cause I one day, like, their shop truck broke down and I was the only other guy that had a pickup truck. And they're like, you're going to take one of these. Actually, it wasn't one, it was four. Cause their truck had issues and they're like, we've been trying to fix it, but it didn't fit. Riley, you're taking four. I'm like, okay. And they were in these custom, like, bulletproof crates, the whole 9 yards. And they're like, and the owner pulls me aside. He goes, you were going to drive very, very carefully. I go, okay, cool. It's fine. I drive this road every day. He goes, no, I don't think you understand. My insurance policy can't handle this. I go, why? How much are these parts? He says, each one of those is $250,000.
Oh, so just driving with a cool $1 million. No big
Cool,
deal.
man. I got an
Yeah.
F-150 with $1 million in the back. So
Ooh.
it was really nerve wracking. But I mean, that's the parts we made. And I hated it. It was the most boring thing I've ever done. And I'm not a sports person. I like racing motorcycles. That's really all I liked. And they only watched football. Sorry to all the football people out there, but I think it's boring. Right. And it was crazy because that's all they watched 24/7. And we traded shifts. So we worked, I think it was 5 12s, and then we would work either a Saturday or Sunday, a 12. No, it was, yeah, Saturday or Sunday or a 12. And then the next week they'd flip you. So then you'd work nights and you'd work 5 12s, and then you'd work a weekend. You'd alternate your weekend and then they'd flip you back. Dude,
Whoa.
it was brutal. It was brutal. I think I lasted maybe 4 months.
I'm shocked you lasted that long. That is
It
rough.
sucked. So, and they were like, we don't care. And they weren't really the nicest people ever, but whatever. It got me into machining. So, um, but it was unique because, EDM runs in the millions, right? They're like, oh yeah, this is, we're gonna cut 2 millions off this. I'm like, how can you even measure that? Like, you don't even have a CMM. Like, oh, we got one. Like, okay, that thing that's not working. Yeah, we have one, but it doesn't work. Cool. All right.
Oh.
It was very, very unique shop. Um, but so then I got a phone call from my good old friend Phil at Crankworks, and he goes, Riley, I hear you're a machinist now. I go, yeah, Phil, I'm a machinist. By the way, I'm building another bike. Can I get you to help me out with the crank? He goes, I got you one even better. I need you to show up tomorrow. I'm like, well, I work tomorrow. He goes, quitting your job today. You're showing up tomorrow. All right, what am I doing? He goes, you're my new guy. I go, all right, I'll see you tomorrow then. So without even, like, really knowing what I was doing, I quit. I walked in the guy's shop, the owner, said, hey man, I'm done. Peace out. He's like, okay, well, you lasted longer than anyone else thought. Like, their turnover was insane. Guys were walking out in the middle of the day. They're like, I
I've
can't take it anymore. I'm out.
Yeah, it sounds mind-numbing.
Oh,
I
it
don't
sucked.
Yeah.
So, but I walk into Crankworks the next day, and he goes, "Here's your mill." It was a Sharp vertical mill. I don't remember the brand or the model, but it was just a. He goes, "Here you go. We make connecting rods. You're my new connecting rod guy, and Mastercam because I did some, the at least the programming classes at Gateway." He goes, "You're my new connecting rod guy. Have fun." All right, cool. Let's start making connecting rods. And so literally, like, here I am, my first programming job slash making connecting rods, and I'm now high speed machining, get all the parts done. They make the cranks, send them out. We go over the first race. Sure enough, boom, first place. We're like, all right, cool. I got a good rider this year. Another first place, another first place. That guy, Phil, is a genius when it comes to making power, right? connecting rods and crankshafts. That's all we did. And this guy knows everything there is to know about a connecting rod. And I was the guy that made all of them. It was really fun. So,
That's amazing. So I have yet to see the writing on the wall on how you're going to get to where you are now. 'Cause had I heard this story up to this point, I would have thought this guy's going to be in motocross for the rest of his life.
yep.
So where did that turn happen?
Well, so the turn happened when I really hurt myself. I was out on a track. I ended up collapsing the last three discs of my spine.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, so
Jeez.
I herniated the last three discs, and it put me. I was pretty bad. They're like, "Well, we're gonna fuse your back, and we're gonna do this," and so I was. That was it. I was like, "I'm done. Like, I have bills to pay. I can't do this anymore." And so I hung it up. Doctor was like, "Great. I wanted to have you hang it up years ago." He goes, "About time." He goes, "I didn't quite literally mean for you to destroy your back." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, here we go." So 23 broken bones later, and you know, whatever. I hung it up, and I haven't touched a bike since.
Oh geez.
Yeah.
So was that when you left Crankworks then?
So I left shortly after that. I got poached by another shop called Rugo. It was just a job shop, and they threw me in front of a machine that I've never even seen before. And it was the very first Haas ST30 SSY. So it was a dual spindle, machine before they branded it as the DS. And they're like, "Hey, you're gonna run this. You're gonna use a software called Part Maker, and yeah, have fun." And it was really, really one of the best learning experiences I've ever had. Because I mean, you're cutting every material to whatever tolerance someone could come up with. To It was just really, it was unique, and we had very diverse customers. It was brass and titanium, and submarine parts, and you know parts that weren't defense related, but we somehow got that
Right.
worked in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So but like crazy stuff like that, and I found a love for turn mills, and like I love turn mills. They're a blast. Everyone's terrified of them. I'm like, man, I don't care. Let's do anything we can on a turn mill. Dual spindle, and I learned Swiss there. So we were running what was that thing? It was a Ganesh. So Ganesh is a very unique machine. It's a Swiss style machine. So the emphasis on style. Like it's got gang tooling, it's got, sub main, sliding the whole it's a Swiss machine, but the diameter is larger. So it would end up to like inch and a half, I believe it was.
Oh wow, yeah, pretty
But it would
big.
still run a 12-foot bar. So you got an inch and a half spooling up to 6,000 RPM, shaking the whole shop to pieces. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, we ran those things 24/7. So I learned
Wow.
Swiss machining, I learned milling, learned, fourth axis milling out of any material you could think of. It was really fun working there. But this guy came in one day, and he shows up in this car, and it's a rally fighter. I'm like, "Oh, no way. I've only seen pictures. I've heard about him. I've never seen him though." And he's like, "Hey, this is a cool car. Why don't you come out here?" And I was just the guy sitting at the desk, right? Like everyone was at lunch, and I'm made me man the front desk. I'm sitting there programming, and this guy, his name's Coach. He goes, "Hey, come here. I need you to design me a control, or front end, right? So his upper and lower control arm." He goes, "I need you to design me a control arm to go on this car." I'm like, all right, cool. Well, we don't really do design. We're just a job shop. He goes, "Yeah, that's fine. Let's do this." I'm like, all right, cool. And so literally he's out there with a tape measure. He's like, "I need it about this long by this long, about this wide. Let's draw something up." And so someone started drawing something up. And next thing you know, we're making control arms for the rally fighters. It was shifters and this and that. And then, I had a blast doing that. And next thing I know, one of my really good friends that I went to high school with is one of their lead purchasing people. And we sat down to dinner one night, and he was like, "Hey, you're a machinist. We just bought a bunch of machines. Why don't you come work for us?" I'm like, "All right, cool." So here I am, Local Motors. And they literally just tagged me as the machinist because it was just me. And they had a bunch of really old, crappy machines that we ended up selling because they were junk. Like it was machines that they had stopped making parts for years ago. And so I said, "Well, these are junk. I can't do anything. Can't even fix them. Can't even find someone to fix them." And so uh, they got rid of them, and I got a Haas VF4SS and a ST25 or ST20 or something like that. And I was the machinist. And I said, all right, cool. Let's make some parts then. They're like, all right, cool. This is a rally fighter. Make anything you want. Okay, well, do you have models? Kind of. We'll give you some models, but mostly just make whatever you want. And it was like free game. And so it was literally I'd make something and then send it off for anodize or this or that, and they'd be like, this is cool. What else do you want to make? I don't know. What else do you need? Oh, I know. Let's do this. And it was just this crazy like willy nilly. We're making cool stuff. That's all we do. And so that's what I did. I made cool things and designed them, and no engineering went into that. Like parts that I was making, it was just it's cool. Just make it.
Right.
So I was making all the models and making prints for my own use on the machines. And, it was really a lot of fun. Well, then a guy came in the door. You've had him on your show, Bree Pettis. And Bree's in there and he goes, I want a rally fighter. If you're listening, what's up, Bree? And so he's like, I run this company and we make these 3D printers. Well, the next thing you know, we're like, oh, this is really cool. And here comes a slew of 3D printers. I mean, there was probably 50 of them. I don't know, but they all show up, and now we've got 3D printed parts on there and this and that. And I remember we printed a cup holder because there was no cup holder in the Rally Fighter. And so how the motor package and transmission sat was really unique. So the motor was super far back. And so where your shifter was literally was like, there was no linkage. You were just adjusting the yoke on the transmission. That's really what
nuts.
It was so short. And so, so the tunnel is right there, and like you're resting your arm on the tunnel. And they're like, we really need a cup holder. So I'm like, let's 3D print a cup holder. So we 3D printed a cup holder, and I machined a cool bezel and we put it in there. And, they were like, hey, you made a part. Let's get you in a car, show you how to drive the thing, and we'll let you do tour, like hot laps with customers. All right, cool. Let's do it. I've gone fast. I've done stupid things. I've jumped vehicles. Let's do it. And so I became like the kind of, one of the guys that was allowed to do test drives.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so it was nuts. Like we'd always leave a car parked out front, and we just have people come in, and it got to the point they were like, if you're semi-serious, we'll let you get a test drive. But it wasn't like anyone that could just walk in the door. And so, if anyone, was freed up that was on like the registered list or the approved list of drivers, you hop on a car and take them on for a test drive. And I mean, it was nuts. They were always like, Riley, like, you got a machine running, like, just go get these guys a test drive. Anyway, I got to give people that were really awesome, like professional baseball players and like the Prince of Dubai. And yeah, it was like crazy people that were coming in and just do whatever you want, man. Just let's build a cool car, and giving them test drives. And I mean, it's not every day that you have a jump in the back of your parking lot. And it was really cool because you'd come around the corner and you'd beep the horn 3 times. And that meant no one walk out the back doors. And then sure enough, the guy would I'd go flying past. You do 60 and you hit this jump, you let off the throttle and you let the thing kind of carry over at about 50 over a jump in the parking lot, then you spin it around in a donut, hammer the throttle, and then chase after a section of whoops in the parking lot, right? It was like, it's like Blake Wilkie type of stuff.
Right.
Back before he even like was building cars probably.
And you're getting paid for it.
And I was getting paid for it.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, my car is in the shop. They're like, I'll just take a rally fighter home. So here I am, like driving a, race car everywhere.
Oh my goodness.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, Chicago, IMTS, driving a car, IMTS, driving cars everywhere. And it was whatever, just go have fun. If you break it, whatever, we'll fix it. It's testing. So
right.
it was a lot of fun. And then
those were always so neat too, because you could pay to go help assemble it too, if I remember right.
So if you purchased the vehicle, to get around the homologation rules, you had to assemble 51% of the vehicle. So by assembling 51%, it's now considered a kit car. So that's how they avoid, I don't know, like safety regulations and all of that
Right,
stuff.
yeah. Only
So
important things, but
yeah, it's
still
fine,
very
whatever.
cool.
Yeah. Uh, and it was a lot of fun. You got to meet guys that were, I met this guy, his name's Jeff High. He is kind of like the godfather of modern day jewelry. And I was like, what do you do? Because I mean, he was building the biggest, fastest, nastiest car we've ever done. It was 725 horsepower to the wheels. It was terrifying.
That really is,
It was
yeah.
terrifying. Well, Jeff became a friend of mine, and all this stuff, and it was pretty cool. But he like designed 5-axis machines. They're very much based upon dental style of 5-axis mills, but they do it for jewelry now. And so he's like, yeah, you come up with this, and he created the program and the whole 9 yards. It was really cool to get to know him quite a bit, and then we worked later with each other on some stuff. But yeah, it was a blast. And then things changed, and the Stratty came about, and I was like, what on earth is a Stratty? Like, oh, we have this cool thing. We're 3D printing a car. Well, what are you talking about? You're 3D printing a car. Yeah, it's crazy. We like are working on this machine. We need you to help machine some stuff for it. I'm like, all right, well, cool, let's do it. And so I was making some stuff. I had no idea what it was for, let alone I come to find out it's for Cincinnati Bam. It was what it was. It was a laser body that they converted into a 3D printer. And at the time, it was printing like 200 pounds an hour. And we had no idea what we were doing. But they had the idea of 3D printing a car. So, kind of my first like intro to large format printing was, hey, Riley, you're going to Chicago, IMTS. We're 3D printing a car live in front of everyone. So, this is 2016. We're 3D printing a car, and then we're going to machine it. I'm like, what freaking machine are you going to do with that? Oh, we got this like 5-axis router. It's made by Thermwood. I'm like, I've never even heard of one of those. Like, yeah, you're going to learn how to run it, and you're going to do it live in front of 2 million people.
No pressure.
No, not at all. I'm like, are you kidding me? And so here I am, Chicago IMTS, and I worked along with those guys. But yeah, we 3D printed a car, and I don't know if you went that year or not.
I did, yeah.
I
I
was
remember.
there 3D printing a freaking car, staying up till I didn't sleep for a week, because we were working all around the clock. I slept in the booth a couple of times. One
Oh.
day I was so tired. We were on the assembly stage or the assembly phase of the car. We were getting things all put together, and they had got the seats kind of in it. And I was like, I am exhausted. I'm just going to sit in this thing. I passed out in it for like 2 hours while they're working on it. It was a sharp learning curve, and it was exhausting. And was helped change the phase of 3D printing. You know, it was nuts because I'm walking the show around a little bit the time that I did get, and they were like, "Yeah, can you believe these guys? They're building a car," and you're like, yeah, that's me. Like you're just listening to people, in the crowd, like they have a printer. It's the size of my garage. It was so fun.
That is
So
so funny.
we printed a car, we assembled it, drove it out of there. So did that, and then it got like heavy into 3D printing, and I got into running that big Thermwood a lot. And originally our cycle time was like, I think it was like 28 or 30 hours, and we were running it as much as we possibly could. And then we yeah, it was nuts. But Detroit and SEMA and all these events, and we did all that. So it was a lot of fun, but decided it was time for a departure. And so I went and ran another shop called Trask. Yeah, it's just, making motorcycle parts, 31-inch billet wheels and stuff like that. And, that was fun, and made a lot of parts. So that's where I really streamlined the effectiveness of fixtures and fixture making. And okay, I'm going to make modular fixtures that we can just stick in a machine, hit select start. So we had it dialed down to a science that, I mean, we made the same series of 50 parts every week. And it got to the point that I was making too many parts. They couldn't even sell them fast enough.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was like, okay, I need another 10 grand of material this week. And he's like, oh man, like I just gave you 10 grand last week. I go, I know. And I already made all your parts. Like they're all back from coding next week. And so it was a really good thing, and it pushed them into another stage. And so they're doing really well now. Then at that point, I was like, okay, I need to get a big boy job. I had some things that are going on in my personal life, and I started doing sales. And so I was doing cutting tool sales for Marshall Tool, which is now owned by Production Tool, which is like Berkshire Hathaway.
Right. Yeah.
So
I saw that on your LinkedIn. I had no idea that you worked for Marshall. We don't use them a ton, but we have ordered stuff from them. That was
yeah,
pretty funny.
so I mean, I was doing cutting tool sales, and it was a lot of fun. I liked doing that a lot because you go into shops and you see what they're doing, and we're young guys, like we kind of know what we're doing. We do it the fun, fast way, right? We're like, oh yeah, high speed machining or whatever. I was going into shops and they're like, what's a carbide end mill? You're kidding me, right? And I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
like high speed steel, what?
Yeah.
Uh,
You're like, it's like we're long
yeah,
past that,
we're
right? Like
way
we're
past that, right?
yeah.
And so yeah, they're like, "Oh, what's programming?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So I mean, there is a ton of shops out there that they either A don't have programming or B they are so in the dark ages that like they don't progress at all. But yet they're making parts that are flying in helicopters and in missiles and so I got to see really really cool stuff. And then you go into the fun shops and you meet the really cool people and the guys that are pushing that limit. And so that's where I met a lot of like my really close friends now. So, Mike Jacobs is one of them. So Mike, obviously, he ended up working for me at Nikola a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, he was over at Walters and I was helping him out with, crazy projects, what they were working on. It was a lot of fun. So did that. And then this guy came to the door one day at the front counter at Marshall and he goes, I'm looking for a machinist. That was poorly translated by the front desk guy to, I'm looking for a guy to help me tool up my machines. And I'm like, how did you get that translation out of that? And this guy walks up and gives him my phone number. And next thing you know, I'm talking to a really good friend of mine now. And he's like, hey, I need a machinist, and you are the most recommended person I've ever met. And I go, I don't even know who you are. What do you do? And what do you want? I'm here to sell you tools. He goes, oh no, you're not selling me tools. I'm buying you. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I want to do this. I'm doing sales. This is more fun. He goes,
Right.
I think you're mistaken. And I'm like, he goes, let me take you to lunch at least. So he takes me to lunch. We go down the street, and then we drive to this construction site. He goes, oh, let me take you back to your car. He drives me to this construction site. I'm like, what are you doing here? He goes, this is our new office. I go, our new office? What do you mean our? He goes, I'm still ingraining you. You're working for us. You come very highly recommended by a few very key people, and you're working for us. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm not doing this. I'll humor you. Next thing you know, I'm standing in a building that's being built, and there is a 12-foot deep hole in this 1 foot thick concrete floor. And it's like this perfectly like rectangle hole, and it's 12 feet deep. I'm like, you guys building a swimming pool? What do you guys do? They go, yeah, we're building the future of trucks. We're building hydrogen electric semi trucks. I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. I sell cutting tools. I don't see a single machine. They're like, this is the foundation for your new machine. What? He goes, yeah, this ain't no pool. This is a foundation. This is your new machine. And I'm like, all right, you might have got my interest peaked a little bit. What are we talking here? And so they laid it all out, and they're like, you are going to be in charge of the coolest shop ever. It's the ultimate playground. And so took a little bit of persuasion, but here I am 4 years later, and I love it. So
That's so cool.
yeah, it's
My
awesome.
goodness.
So I've had a very interesting, fun, series of machining careers.
It sounds like it, man. That
So
is so cool. And it sounds like the front desk is the right place to be. I
yeah,
mean,
apparently, yeah, exactly. So
that is awesome. Well,
yeah,
let's get into some questions
yeah.
from listeners. We had one. How hard is it to cool that truck? I
I'd
imagine.
assume he's talking about the fuel cell electric truck. So the fuel cell truck is, it has its own challenges of cooling, and a lot of those are very, very cool, and a lot of them I can't even talk about. But it is very challenging, but it's being handled. So I would
Okay.
love to talk more about that, but I can't,
Yeah, it's a
unfortunately.
secret sauce. I
Yeah,
gotcha.
it's that one's super really cool.
That's awesome. Jacob wrote in. He said he talked to you all the time. He says, "What's the maximum amount of questions he can ask about machining in a single day?"
Well, I think we're currently up to about 10 a day. So Jacob got thrown into that guy's got an interesting. He got thrown into making some parts, and I went in there to help him. Dylan is the most comical thing you've ever seen in your life. It is a 24-inch diameter nut. He is making nuts.
Okay.
Okay. And it's a for some sort of a mining equipment or whatever. And he literally calls me, he goes, and I've known him since we were little kids. And he calls me, he goes, "Yeah, so I'm a machinist now." I go, "Weren't you like studying to become a doctor?" He goes, "Yeah, I kind of gave that up. Like I got bored." And he goes, "I'm making nuts now." I'm like, "All right, cool, whatever. Put it in a lathe and make a small little part." He goes, "Yeah, it's 1,600 pounds. I don't know how to do that."
Oh.
What? Yeah, the thread is a 15 and a half inch Acme thread. Yeah, I'm like,
Whoa.
oh my gosh. So we talk all the time, and he's like, "Well, what do I do for this?" I'm like, "Well, Jacob, like let's figure it." So I've had to like mentor Jacob via WhatsApp, like and on the phone on the way home and to work every day, and we talk all the time just because he has got such a challenge, and they're doing it on a Haas, and I'm like,
Oh my
"How are
goodness.
you doing a 1,600-pound nut on a Haas?" Yeah, it's crazy. So now
That's
he's
insane.
doing really well. I'm really proud of him. He's like a little brother. So
Well, his other question was, how about we talk about some hurdles for programming 5-axis versus 3-axis and how you overcome them?
okay, that's a really good question. And he actually texted me. He's like, "I'm going to put some stuff in there." It's interesting because when you go from 3 axis to 5 axis, there's not a lot that changes, right? In my viewpoint, it's just how you attack them changes. Um, you know, and it's also based upon the kinematic of the machine, right? So,
So
uh,
that was actually what I was going to ask you about, because you have experience with this Thermwood and now the Zimmerman.
mhm,
How does attacking something with a head like that change your way? Because even when I go from like my S700s to my F600, where
mhm,
then the head is now moving,
right.
now it doesn't bother me. But when I first got it, like there was that moment of like, ooh, things are not moving the way it's like when you're
Yeah.
in the car and the truck next to you is backing up and
Uh
you
huh.
think you're going forward and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
wait,
I'm
wait.
okay.
You're like, "What's going on here?" So, yeah, that's a really fun one because, like, specifically the Thermwood and the Zimmerman, right? It's like shooting. So it's like shooting a minigun, right? I've never actually done it, but my friend is I don't know, whatever. He works there and gets to shoot a minigun, right? M134D, cool, whatever. I'm only shooting 6,000 rounds a minute, but he said the best gunners, door gunners, are actually people that have never fired a gun in their life. He goes, "You point and spray." He goes, "Wherever it's like a garden hose, right?" Machining on a thing like that, it's kind of the same way, right? You don't think of it as, "Oh, well, the head is, this." And no, do whatever. You can stick a tool out this far or however far you need to, and you literally just point it at whatever you want to machine, and you say, "Machine that." Now, the thing that gets challenging is when you start to do cylindrical parts, right? So, or parts that you're doing 5 sides of machining, but now you have to have a retract plane for the head to unwind. So the Zimmerman, our specific Zimmerman, it does not have a continuous C head. It will only do 360 one way, 360 another way. So you have to unwind it. So you're physically unwinding the cabling in the column. And so that's where it actually becomes a challenge because you're like, "Okay, I'm going to machine this, and then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to machine this. I'm going to machine this." And like you're pointing at the 5 sides of a block, let's say, but somewhere in there you have to have a retract, and you're going to unwind the spindle. So that's where it becomes challenging because if you are like doing it on a Thermwood, and I was doing it with Mastercam, and I was like, they didn't even have a post. I was just kind of making it up as I go. I literally
Oh,
had start code and end code, and I'd kind of put all the code in the middle. Most everything I did was just locked in 3 axis machining. It was just on weird A, B, and C angles.
right.
Um, so, but like with really nice software, like I got into Mike Jacobs helped me out and got we have hypermill, and that handles all of those unwinds, right? So you can go from side one to side two, and then it knows that it needs to unwind to hit side three and side four, or however you want to do it. So it will handle that for you. But when I was running the Thermwood and I'm piecing this stuff together by hand, like I'm literally taking chunks of million lines of code and like, all right, copy paste. Hopefully this doesn't crash. All right, cool. And you're going to the next thing, right? You have to put all that unwinding in by yourself. So it's not difficult. The most difficult 5-axis that we currently have is the 125. So it's got that B-axis head. So it compounds Y and C is your table. So it will rotate and then Y is going to travel towards the head. And then the head has B, which is rotating on a 45-degree angle. Yeah, on a 45-degree angle. And it's also controlling, so B, X, and Z.
Oh.
That one is by far the most complicated machine to get wrap your head around, because you can't point and play anymore. You have constraints because it won't rotate back the other way to, let's say, hit a opposite feature, right? So let's say you have a bowl, and your bowl is vertically like positioned on Z axis. Okay, so the bowl shape is actually facing Y. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's say you have that and you are trying to 5-axis machine this entire curvature. Well, you can hit one side of it, but you can't other without compounding the C axis. But even then, there becomes issues with constraints of motion, and you can't actually hit the backside. So you end up building fixtures that are on like a 45-degree angle.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. So we haven't had to get into a lot of that, but it's very interesting how you have to do stuff like that.
So what was the decision-making process on getting that machine versus something else?
A billionaire with a lot of money.
Okay, fair enough.
It literally was, I like that, I like that, I like that, I like that. Buy it.
Oh, okay.
So here's a check. I want them tomorrow.
That's fair. That's straightforward.
Yeah, it's very, I wish I had those issues.
Yeah, me too. So actually, you mentioned something earlier in the podcast that I want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You said that your customers are internal.
Yes.
So let's talk about managing internal customers, because I think that a lot of people listening can empathize with that.
Yeah.
And I think that that is a struggle in and of itself, a very unique struggle. Like, I can't go to my customers and say, dude, this is really stupid.
Yeah.
You need to redesign this. I also can't ignore some things that I know are stupid,
right?
Which I know sometimes you can do with internal customers. So talk to me about how you deal with your engineering team, and what kind of collaboration you encourage, and how you get around maybe dumb features that you see.
Yeah, so it's a challenge. So, part of my job, it's even more from the start, right? Originally it was, you're the machinist, you run everything, you do everything. Well, now I've got 3 guys underneath me, and I've got a programmer. I got 2 programmers, and it's just kind of a body to help out. And it's morphed into, I do a bunch of machining and programming, but then also I get pulled away to go do engineering meetings. And it's insane because I'll go to these engineering meetings and you get these guys and they're incredibly smart people. And they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna put this internal square corner, 100 millimeters deep. You're like, and I'll raise my hand and be like, can't do that, guys. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I can draw it. I go, yep, nope. Cutting tools are round. They go roundy round, and it's not going to happen. So I have to tread lightly as much as I possibly can, but also come in with a big hammer, because you get these engineers that come in and like, oh, I got this great idea and I'm going to engineer it, and it's going to be the utmost accuracy, but it's going to have these, 1/4 millimeter radiuses on every feature. And they'll send me a part, and I'll just literally, I'm going to come sit at your desk and help you out for a minute. And I'll literally go and sit at their desk, like, all these fillets, delete them all. I don't want any single one. And we're going to work on helping you understand how a part is actually made. So it's crazy because we have thousands of people that work on however many, I lose count. I'm like, hey, have you guys ever seen a machine before? No, I've never seen one. All right, come on, let's go on a field trip. Let's go. we're going on a machine shop. And so I'll literally drag them to the machine shop and explain to them how a cutting tool works. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. And then they'll come back to me with, let's say, a 6 millimeter radius. I'm like, come on, guys, like open it a little bit more.
Right.
Like,
Can it be 6.1?
yeah,
Can it be
exactly. Can I
6.5?
swing a
Like,
radius? At
yeah.
least some sort of arc. And they're like, well, but you said go with whole numbers. I'm like, no, tools are on whole numbers. Don't make me drive it into a corner. So I have to like part engineer, part machinist, part like I literally have to help these guys engineer their parts to be able to be manufactured.
Yeah.
So and it's fun because today someone came in and said, we have a challenge and we don't know how to overcome it. What do you think? And I'd be like,
Ooh,
let's
I
do
like
this.
that.
So
Yeah.
it's we're blending technologies, right? So we're taking 3D printed parts and adding, drill fixtures and cut fixtures and, templates. And maybe it's got a 3D printed feature that is then mated to a machined component. So we do a lot of like molding of additive, subtractive all at the same time to help us manufacture components.
How cool.
It's pretty fun. So
That sounds like a ton of fun.
yeah, it is a challenge. And even helping out Jacob, he comes to me and says, dude, this is really dumb. I'm like, oh, I know. The engineers are not smart. Like, I love you guys, but we have to make a part able to be manufactured,
Yeah.
right? There's things about parts you just have to be able to work with. And so I actually, even when I was working at other shops, I'd push it upon the engineer, whoever it is. Now I understand aerospace is locked process and blah blah blah, but like sometimes you still can go back to these customers and say, hey man, if you were to change that one little feature, it would take your part from a $50 part or a $100 part, and I could cut $20 off of it because I don't have to sit there and diddle away with this microscopic tool or whatever. So that's kind of what I always challenge and always question people as much as you can.
Right. Yeah. Tread lightly,
Yeah.
but still do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, that brings us on to shop news and new things. Anything new in your world? New machinery,
I
software, printers, anything?
mean, I'm trying to work on a deal on getting that Datron. That would be really cool. But
Yeah.
we've grown in the machine shop as of recently, and now I'm trying to figure out. I used to have it down to a science when I was running Trask and other shops. Like everyone always had something to do. Well, our parts are really big. We've got big machines, they run for a long time. Well, you can only push a broom for so long, right?
Yep.
So now it's like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to keep things motivated and stuff kind of like that. It's just managerial housekeeping is, but like also like making processes simpler, setup like toolkits. Like I want a drawer, you open that drawer, it's got everything in it, and I want little cards, and I want like Kanban stuff, and I want like everything in there, because we've gone through and we did the tool cabinet, and that's awesome, so it's all in a vending machine now. But yeah, just kind of that's the stuff that that's the only new stuff really.
Okay.
So
That's not
yeah,
a bad thing.
no, it's not.
Well, that brings me to what did you research this week? First of two questions I ask every guest. Doesn't have to
Hmm.
be machinery related. It's just what's been popping up in your
The
browser.
hot topic, dude. I'm so all over the place on everything. It's insane. Like I've got probably 400 tabs open on like web browsers, on home computer, work computer, phone, the whole nine yards. So I mean, it's kind of all over the place. It's you know learning how to I want to work on a business that is involved with machining. So I've been kind of researching a little bit of that and what market I want to get into and kind of what machines and stuff like that. And then, kind of looking at like, oh, I need to build a backyard and, just I'm all over the place. So
I feel you for
yeah,
sure. Yeah, I'm very much the same. It's like everything interests me, so I
yeah,
am always researching.
yeah, it's insane. I'm all over the place.
Well, the other question I ask every guest is what are the things you are working on to be a better person, leader, employee, what have you? None of us are perfect. We're all working on stuff. What's yours?
Yep, we are always working on something. Honestly, I'm just trying to maximize my efficiency while at home and at work. So I'm trying to find like how do I do it Is it mental health? Is it, physical health? Is it, some training for managing? So I'm just trying to overall make myself more potent as, the person that I am, right? So how do I do everything 110%? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
This
struggle. It's
yeah,
a struggle. Yeah.
this is where I hold up a Monster Energy can and say, "I'd like to thank my sponsor, Monster Energy. If you could please send me 1,000 cases."
Yeah, exactly. Give me all the caffeine,
Yeah,
please.
exactly.
Well,
So,
Riley, thank you so much for coming on the show.
absolutely.
It has been an absolute pleasure getting to hear your story. I had no idea you had the whole motocross background.
Yep.
I looked at your LinkedIn and I was like, "Oh, this is seems like it'll be a cool episode." And,
Yeah,
some of these companies I recognize and
right.
had no idea. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, and, I've had a very fun, younger life, and I'm only 36, so I've got a lot more to go. So, keep in touch and, we'll keep this riot rolling.
Definitely. Thank you to the new Patreon members, Matthew and Cameron. Thank you to all who back the show. It helps me send people like Riley microphones so you guys have good audio. And thank you all for listening. I will be back next week.